I made the promise that I would have my fanfiction Guilty Conscience available on YouTube as an audiobook by Monday, May 15th, 2023. And I shall deliver. Howdy, I'm Sonja and I write. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and I am going to keep things short and quick so we can get on to the real meat of the video. I've decided to take the fanfiction that I've made and put that into the form of an audiobook that is accessible here on YouTube. And this is the first chapter of said fanfiction. So, to keep things short, if you like Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Golden Wind, if you're a fan of Leone Abbacchio, and you're into ex-reader fanfictions and audiobooks, you should stick around because the next 30 minutes are going to be the first chapter of my first ever fanfiction, aka Guilty Conscience. If you're coming from Wattpad, where my story is mainly accessible, hi, welcome back. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. So if any of what you just heard sounds juicy, scrum-diddly-umptious to you, you should stick around because this is Chapter 1, The Messenger. The rustling of loose paper was the only sound to stir the silence. Wyan flipped through the documents that lay neatly on her desk. Her eyes flicked over the deep blue ink scribbled across each page. Carefully, she memorized the words that had been printed before her, afraid of the consequences that would surely arise if she managed to forget anything on those reports. With curtains drawn and her head buried deep in loose pages, Wyan was lost in her studies. Memorize it. Do not forget the message, she told herself over and over again. Her body was rooted to the desk's chair. She wouldn't move until she could rehearse each message fluidly. It had been 8 p.m. when she took a seat in her bedroom to begin her work, and 11 p.m. when she got up to grab a drink of water. 3 a.m. rolled around and Wyan still hadn't moved from her desk. Not even the erratic AC unit in her tiny apartment could break her focus. The loud buzzing was drowned out by the blanket of concentration that Wyan wrapped herself in. It was only 3:50 a.m. when a light buzzing coaxed Wyan into breaking her focus. Ugh, I was just getting the hang of this, she groaned in frustration. The buzzing continued. Reluctantly, she stood on stiff legs and moved from one end of her room to the other. Her silver flip phone, a prized possession, shook on its charging port. Someone was calling her, and it didn't appear to be anyone that she knew. The buzzing didn't cease as Wyan wrapped her fingers around the cold metal and flipped open the phone's face. She didn't know anyone who would be bothering her at such an early hour, so softly she sat the phone back into its port and headed back for her desk. After a moment, the buzzing stopped. And after another, it began again, and again, and again. Wyan crossed the room in 3 strides, swiping up her phone with a scowl. With the flick of her wrist, the phone had snapped open, and no sooner was the cool metal receiver pressed into her ear. She had serious work to do and didn't have time for any spam calls. She was already falling into the arms of sleep and needed to get back to her documents as soon as possible. The call began with a soft click, and Wyan wasted no time with formalities. Hello? Who's this? And why am I being called so late at night? Wyan spoke firmly, tapping a slippered foot on her bedroom's black rug. So what? You were just going to ignore my calls? The voice spoke thickly, clearly not in the mood to be talked down to. Oh, no. My deepest apologies, sir. It was not my intention to ignore your calls. It was, my phone hadn't been working. Your ID read as unknown, but I most definitely put you down as a contact in my phone. Please forgive me. So how may I be of aid to you this morning? Wyan stammered, trying her best to salvage the trust she had dismantled, but in return, all she received was eerie quiet. Wyan slowly guided her legs back to her desk and sat, awaiting a response. When too many long seconds passed, she began to grow uneasy. This wasn't going to end well. Leaning across her desk, she reached an arm and lifted the edge of the drawn curtains, peering out of her bedroom window and into the early morning sky. The apartment's entire courtyard had been swept away by darkness. Not even the sun had begun to rise. Wyan wondered why he would be calling at such an hour. He never called this early. A sudden, strained voice startled Wyan out of her thoughts. "To the port, now. Make sure to wear something presentable." The call clicked to an end. Without so much as a second thought, Wyan threw the phone onto her bed and began shoveling all of the loose papers that lined her desk into an empty drawer. Her fingers fumbled as she tried to keep the documents as neat as possible. But with her boss requesting her presence, Wyan had little time to spare. She needed to get to the port quickly. She didn't want to deal with the consequences of being tardy. Leaky Eye Luca is what they called him. He was a mafioso. And he was also the man that Wyan worked for. It was not something she was all too eager to boast about, so her work affairs remained a secret from her friends, family, and especially the police. The low-end mafioso had promised Wyan he would help her get rid of the nasty debt she owed Passione, one of the biggest crime syndicates in all of Italy. But it wasn't until the first day of working with the greasy mobster that she found out exactly what he would be using her for. She would be his messenger. The job required her to deliver serious information to the small-time criminals of Passione, the types of messages that couldn't be sent over the phone or through a letter. After hours of memorization, Wyan would have to deliver the crucial reports verbally, all across the city of Naples, Italy. Wyan closed and locked the desk compartment, spinning on her heels to face a full closet. Calling it small would be an understatement, but it was just big enough to house all of her favorite clothes. Digging her hands into the mass of different colored fabrics, Wyan began to search for anything that was remotely presentable. And after what felt like too many long minutes, she pulled out a pair of dark green dress pants and a matching jacket. "This will have to do," she thought as she made her way to the front door. Well, either this or my pajamas. A piece of buttered bread sat limply in Wyan's mouth as she grabbed the door's handle. There was simply no time for breakfast, so this would have to do. A rush of cool air tickled her cheeks as she stepped into the hallway. It was quiet, save for the fumbling of keys as Wyan locked the front door of her apartment. A loud click sounded, and then she began her descent down the hall and toward the parking garage. Though she couldn't help but feel nervous, a subtle, cold wariness sat at the back of her mind. It felt different. It felt bizarre. This meeting had to be something important, or Luca wouldn't be spending his early morning dealing with Wyan. He never really liked her, but he did like the money she made him. Maybe Wyan would finally get the chance to meet one of the higher-ups in Passione. The higher the rank, the more they'd pay, and the quicker that she could get rid of her debt. After all, her 3 weeks of working with Luca had only involved deliveries to the low-end thugs of the mafia. It was strange that Wyan hadn't been introduced to any leaders, maybe even deliberate. Wyan arrived at the port in half an hour. The drive was mellow. She let the warm summer air roll through her car as she drove down the quiet side roads and sleeping streets. The humid breeze ruffled her hair and tickled her flushed skin. Summers were hot, day and night, and with the nervousness of being summoned so early in the morning, along with the thick heat that drifted in and out of her car, Wyan's formal wear clung tightly to her skin. Lined with shipping vessels and small boats, the port of Naples was packed, even in the dead of night. Slowing her car, Wyan drifted past early morning workers and flickering streetlights. She didn't bother staring at any particular individual for too long. Instead, her eyes darted across the landscape, looking for anything suspicious or out of place. Paranoia struck Wyan the second her car cruised into the port, and she had a gut feeling that it wouldn't be leaving her anytime soon. Arriving at a rather empty parking lot, Wyan pulled her car to a stop, facing the open ocean. She sat quietly, watching restless waves disappear into the sea. She wanted to close her eyes, wanted to embrace the rhythmic beating of cool water and let the warm breeze lull her to sleep. But she knew better than to relax. Mere seconds passed before the clicks of opening car doors sounded, followed by 2 rather aggressive slams. By the thick stench of cheap cologne and the faint smell of body odor, Wyan knew exactly who had entered her vehicle. "To the city prison," Luca said before taking a breath from his lit cigarette. "And hustle, would ya?" Wyan eased her foot on the gas, circling the lot and driving back out of the port. She remained silent, a quiet chauffeur delivering a pair of noisy clients. She stayed close-mouthed for the full 40-minute drive to the inner-city prison of Naples, and remained that way as the men in the back seats puffed on their cigarettes and squabbled about how many women they supposedly bedded. To Luca's right was a man that Wyan only met once before. The rumors that swirled around his name made her glad of that. She would have preferred to stay clear of the mafioso as a whole, but with a heavy debt and no other options, Wyan had to sit tight and avoid his wandering stare. Galstav Bruta, a lanky man with a drinking problem and an aggressive, receding hairline. He was a supposed wife-beater and a top-tier drug seller, making sales that no low-end thug of Passione could achieve as he could. His pink golf shirt was unbuttoned at his chest, and sweat stains were plastered under his armpits. He wasn't the most attractive man, to say the least, and his poor hygiene and bad attitude only added to his case. Make sure to park a few blocks away from the prison. Luca sucked on the dwindling end of his cigarette as he spoke. I don't want any cops seeing the car plates. Pulling into an empty parking spot beside a vacant-looking apartment building, Wyan unbuckled her seatbelt and glanced back at the men who occupied her car's back seats. You need me to tell you how to get out of the car? Luca bit out between clenched teeth. Let's go, hustle, Wyan. We're walking to the prison. Stepping out and closing the door behind her, Wyan moved around the back side of the car to open the doors for her boss and his lackey. No thank yous were received, but dirty glances and side eyes were shot in her direction. Outside, everything smelled like the sea. It was a beautiful night, and a salty ocean tang filled the air. The heavy shuffling of Galstav's shoes was the only noise that came from the trio. No one spoke as they made their way down the quiet street toward the city prison. The city prison was a round box of solid stone. No bars to look in and no bars to look out. The thugs who ended up in the pit didn't ever come out. Wyan swallowed thickly as the group made their way closer to the prison's front doors. Wait here, Galstav, Luca asked of his lackey as he flicked his cigarette butt onto the sidewalk before drawing his eyes to Wyan. Yeah, and you, he spat, pointing at her. Come with me. Galstav's slender frame leaned against the rough stone wall. He smiled at Wyan. His yellowing teeth shone in the dark as his thin lips pulled up towards his eyes. He knew she was nervous. His ugly smile didn't help. Following closely by Luca's side, the two moved past the iron gates of the prison and through the main office's sliding doors. Stepping into the brightly lit space, they were met with a line of police officers who didn't look all too pleased to be dealing with visitors so early in the morning. Calmly, Luca approached the group of officers that stood before them. We're here to visit Polpo. We're his niece and nephew. The lie rolled off his tongue as smooth as warm butter. An officer with strict posture and a furrowed brow looked the two visitors up and down before mumbling. Proceed through the security gate. No gifts can be given or received from any inmates. If any officer deems your behavior suspicious, you'll be removed from the facility and detained immediately. Wyan's heart quickened. She had no idea why Luca brought her to the prison, and she was too scared to ask. After walking through the metal detector and being scanned from head to toe by several officers, Luca and Wyan walked down a vacant hallway. Eyes down. Be respectful, Luca said to Wyan very quietly. After entering the prison, Wyan noticed the drastic change in her boss's behavior. No longer was he acting in his usual boisterous manner, but the young man had straightened his spine and softened his tone. He was an entirely different person. The further they ventured into the prison, the darker it became. They walked on until Luca paused before a single empty cell. A wall of glass separated the hallway and the cell's interior. There was a mattress and a small fridge, but aside from the simple furniture, the room remained lifeless. You took your time getting here, didn't you, Leaky Eye Luca? The voice that spoke was deep and unfamiliar, seeming to come from all directions. Wyan was unsure of where to look, or even who to look at. The cell and hallway remained empty. Luca and herself were the only individuals that took up space. "Apologies, Capo." Luca bowed his head deeply, signaling YN to do the same. "But, sir, we tried our best to get here as quickly as possible." A husky laugh erupted from the empty cell. YN immediately took a step back, distancing herself from the glass. She didn't know why she moved, but in her head, something told her to stay away from that glass wall. "Luca? Who's in there?" YN breathed, but instead of an answer, she was met with another burst of laughter. Pale fear covered Luca's face. His hands trembled at his sides as he tried to keep his focus on the ground. YN had never seen him in such a state. Without warning, the once motionless mattress began to move. It contorted into different shapes as the laughing continued. YN stared, too startled to take her eyes off of the spectacle before her. "Your best isn't good enough, Luca." The mattress, no, the man spoke. In the once empty cell sat a mammoth of a human being, the same man that Luca had addressed as Capo. YN was familiar with the term, but never had the opportunity to meet someone who held the position of a mafia captain, a much higher rank than any of the low-end thugs she'd encountered in the past 3 weeks she'd been working for Luca. Clad in a yellow jumpsuit and a rather strange-looking red cap, the massive Capo stared down at her. His eyes were a pit of blackness, and his nose billowed out from his skull at a sharp point. The Capo sat contently in the center of his cell, trapped behind a sheet of glass, but with the man's sheer size, YN wouldn't be surprised if he could knock down the barrier with his monstrous form. Deliberately, the Capo removed his stare from YN and pointed his eyes towards Luca, setting his large hand on the food slot of the cell's iron door. She hadn't even noticed the small hole, but the second that the Capo's fingers took up a place before the empty slot, she backed away for a second time. "Luca, come close," the large man practically whispered, and without hesitation, Luca stepped toward the food slot. It took mere seconds for the Capo to reach his thick fingers through the opening and wrap them around Luca's neck. In an instant, the smaller man was lifted off the ground and slammed against the cell's solid door. "So you think you can hire outsiders to work under my nose? Do you think that you can get away with living a double life? Is that what this is?" Luca tried to respond, but no words left his lips. Instead, he continued to kick his legs and pull at the large fingers that wrapped around his neck. YN began to shake, unsure of how she should act. But as clumsy as he looked, the Capo seemed to take notice of her panicked behavior. "Luca, it seems that you've brought me a little office lady, all done up in such professional attire." The Capo grinned and took a sharp breath before he continued. "You're too young to be stuck with an office job, little girl. How old are you?" "I'm 19, sir," YN replied in an instant, making sure to keep her eyes pointed at the floor. "Please, young lady, call me Polpo. I'm one of Passione's capos. It's a pleasure to meet you." "I'm YN." "Oh, I know exactly who you are and what you've been doing with my itty-bitty friend Luca here. Nothing in my city goes unnoticed, and no need to be so nervous. I'm a friend after all." There was no way that YN could remotely pretend to be composed. Her boss remained in the grasp of Polpo, who was a mattress only moments ago. And just then it had occurred to YN that her work as a messenger might not have been as true as she once thought. "So that's why I never got to meet any of the higher-ups," she thought to herself. "Luca never officiated me as a real mafioso. I was working outside of Passione this whole time." YN felt her knees begin to buckle. She really didn't know why it mattered if she was or was not a true member of the mafia, but clearly it mattered to Polpo. Her heart and head told her to run, but her feet remained planted on the floor. "Little girl, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen in the next few months. Do you understand?" YN nodded quickly, keeping her gaze pointed toward her shoes. But when she heard a loud thud and Polpo clear his throat, she looked up to meet the Capo's stare. His once soft features turned hard, and Luca lay sprawled on the floor, gasping for air. Has your mother not taught you to look at someone when they speak to you? You're being rather rude, wouldn't you agree? Wayan's eyes widened, but she stood her ground as she softly spoke. You're right, sir. My apologies. Listen, because I'll only say this once. Polpo leaned in towards the glass as he spoke to Wayan, forcing her eyes to stay on his own. I've heard all about your little delivery service, and it appears that you're quite good at your job. So I have a little task for you to complete, a small mission for you to carry out, if you will. The capo's eyes pinned Wayan in place. A smile tugged at his lips as he spoke. I need you to deliver a message to Passione's very own bodyguard squad. Wayan's full attention was on Polpo, her eyes unmoving and gaze intense. Her discomfort did not rise when the capo's smile grew, as she was too interested in the words he spoke. It will be your final message as an outsider of Passione. You won't be delivering any longer following this final request. Wayan sucked in a sharp breath, but didn't interrupt Polpo. Find Bucciarati. Tell him this. A slip of paper flew through the food slot and landed neatly before Wayan's feet. Picking it up cautiously, she unfolded the piece of paper. In messy writing, Wayan made out a small message. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini. That is what the note had scribbled across it. Interrupting her focus on the message, Polpo spoke. Bucciarati is one of my most trusted men. His team needs to receive the message and deal with the problem. Fail, and I'll have you and your little boss's heads for your acts of disobedience against Passione. Where can I find this Mr. Bucciarati? Wayan asked slowly. Lebecchio's. Everyone knows that's where he and his boys go for food, Luca had said, standing from the floor as he massaged his already bruising neck. Such an observant boy, aren't you? Polpo grinned at Luca as he moved his gaze back toward Wayan. Well, well, little rabbit, you should get hopping now. It's time for you to deliver your final message. After a rushed drive back to her apartment, Wayan removed her blazer and plopped herself into bed. She had offered to drive Luca and his lackey back to the port, but her boss claimed that he needed a drink and headed deeper into the city. Kicking off her shoes and pants, Wayan lay sprawled on the mattress, thinking about the message. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini. She couldn't figure out what the message could mean. How could a traitor be inside of a drink? Or was the pink martini being referred to in the message even a drink at all? Still confused from the events of that earlier morning, namely the capo that had also been a mattress, Wayan closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep. It was going to be a busy afternoon in the next few hours. After all, the girl planned on interrupting some high-end mafioso's lunch. After a nap that felt too short, Wayan woke to see her clock reading 1:36 in the afternoon. If she didn't hurry, she would definitely be late. Tossing her sneakers into the hallway, Wayan locked the apartment door and slipped on her shoes to make her way down the stairs to the parking garage. Though Wayan had only heard of the restaurant that the bodyguard squad had regularly frequented, she had never been to the place. Wayan ran through the parking garage, trying to get to her car as quickly as possible. When she was finally inside and with the keys in the ignition, the car jolted toward the exit of the parking garage. A beam of sunlight shone in Wayan's direction, temporarily blinding her as it kissed her skin. The streets were busy, but not jam-packed. Wayan slammed a foot on the gas and took off towards the restaurant. She crossed her fingers and hoped that today would be the day that the bodyguard squad ate lunch at Lebecchio's. Wayan had aimlessly driven around for over 10 minutes. She eventually pulled over and asked an elderly couple for directions, which she cursed herself for not doing earlier. The couple gave her vague instructions, but she was grateful nonetheless. It was 1:53 p.m. when she arrived at Lebecchio's. Hurrying out of the car, Wayan took in the rather simplistic appearance of the venue. No wonder she couldn't find the place. She believed mobsters who were supposedly so high-end would be dining at some lavish bar with skimpy waitresses and free strip shows. But the building before her housed many hungry families and smiling staff, not at all intimidating or what she imagined the establishment would be. Running through the front doors, Wyan grabbed the sleeve of the first waitress she came across. The brown-eyed man nearly dropped his tray of drinks as she tugged on his uniform and forced him to meet her stare. "I need to speak with Mr. Bucciarati, right now. It's business-related and very important. Is he here?" He is here." Before the waiter could finish, Wyan took the tray from his hands and passed it on to an empty-handed blonde employee who had been walking by. She reluctantly took the tray as Wyan spun on her heels and rushed toward the brown-eyed man she had cut off moments ago. "Take me to him and his squad right now." The waiter weaved in and out of tables. Wyan followed closely behind. The restaurant, she learned, was very well decorated and had quite efficient staff. Suddenly, the waiter slowed his pace before turning a corner at the back of the dining room and cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, please excuse my interruption, but Mr. Bucciarati has a visitor." The waiter signaled for Wyan to step into view of the men he had spoken to. Quickly, she stepped forward and took in the group. Teenagers. They were all teenagers. Looking back at the waiter, Wyan raised a brow in question. But the man only smiled and walked out of view. She had been sent to deliver a message to mobsters, not a group of high schoolers who were currently shoveling strawberry cake into their mouths. One of the 4 boys who sat at the dining table, the smallest of the group, finished chewing before he spoke. Who are you?" His unprofessionalism caught Wyan off guard, but remembering the task at hand, she straightened her spine and spoke in a frosty calm. "Hello, gentlemen. I've been sent to speak with Mr. Bucciarati, and—" "Bucciarati isn't here, lady." The boy with the strange hat and what appeared to be a bright orange zebra print pants spoke. He had cake smeared across his lips, but didn't seem to mind as he took in another mouthful. Well, I need to give him a message." "Then go on." The smallest boy spoke again, this time with a piece of strawberry in his mouth. "I've been asked by the capo, Polpo, to relay this message to Bucciarati and his team. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini." Suddenly, all eyes were on Wyan. The mood in the room seemed to change, turning darker and much more serious. Even the customers in the front of the restaurant seemed to cease their conversations. It was then that Wyan noticed the man in purple. His vibrant eyes lingered on her own as he took a sip from his teacup. He was the most intimidating out of the 4 boys, and probably the oldest, but something about his chilling demeanor sparked a curiosity in Wyan. Setting his cup down, softly, the man spoke. "You're not a part of Passione, are you?" His voice was deep and set the hairs on Wyan's arms straight. Unable to think of a smart reply, Wyan let the words tumble out of her mouth. You see, I'm not a member of Passione, but I've been tasked to deliver this message." He stood quickly, walking around the table and planting his feet directly in front of Wyan. He was tall enough to make the girl shrink down as he glowered at her. The scraping of wood sounded, and Wyan knew that the other 3 mafioso had stood as well. To come to her aid, or to stand by their friend, she didn't know. "Polpo is a smart man. And smart men don't give away important information like that for free." His words were barely a whisper. He leaned in closer, strands of his long lilac hair falling around his sharp features. "So tell me, where did a girl like you get information like that?" "I'm telling you the truth, sir. His hands launched forward, flaming into the wall where Wyan now pressed her back. She didn't even realize that she had been walking backwards until the cool brick made contact with her skin. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could manage a single word, a stern voice boomed from behind. "Enough! All of you! Sit down now!" The voice came from a man in a polka-dot suit with raven hair cut into a neat bob. "My deepest apologies for their behavior, darling. I had to attend to a phone call. I'm Bruno Bucciarati." With fluid grace, Bucciarati shook Wyan's hand as his team retired to their seats. "Bacchio, what have I told you about waiting to interrogate people until I get back?" The lilac-haired man clicked his tongue and glanced up from his seat, mumbling a soft, Sorry, before placing a set of red headphones over his ears, clearly done with socializing. Gentlemen, this young lady speaks the truth. She is Polpo's messenger. I just got off the phone with Leaky Eye Luca, and he has confirmed her loyalty. Bucciarati held out a hand, and all eyes were on her again. So, messenger, what has Polpo sent for us today? Bucciarati asked gently, pulling at a chair for Lion to take a seat. Traitors are lurking in the pink martini. She spoke the words for a second time. With a single glance toward each of his boys, Bucciarati waved to his team, and they all stood. Tell Polpo that his message has been received. We have business to attend to. And without looking back at her, the bodyguard squad left the restaurant. You did it! That is chapter 1 of Guilty Conscience, titled The Messenger. Stick around until next Monday when chapter 2 of Guilty Conscience will be out in audiobook form called Pink Martini Traders. And before you ask, yes, I'm very stylish. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for sticking around. Bye!